You know, it's interesting. I've been in this role with Intel for coming on 18 years. I've worked during that time a lot, both on the state government side, but in education. And in the education environment, you know, it's almost the entirety of that time. The slide that we saw earlier, right, that transformation of the old style classroom to that new style classroom with kids, you know, using technology, collaborating, creating. That's where, from a, you know, I personally had my blinders on, that was education, all about that transformation. But then as I sit down with Steve and with Chris Hoffman, the superintendent of the district, and that cabinet, and really listen to them and this massive growth that they're facing, and learning that a school district isn't just about the content and curriculum in the classroom, but it is this massive environment of facilities, transportation, security, and the like. And I think, again, that all of you can relate to that. Whatever your line of government is, that it is more than just that space that you sit within, but it is, there's a lot of moving parts, and everything is interconnected. And I think furthermore, and again, an interesting element here as to why the heck do I have a law enforcement guy sitting here next to an education guy? And what we're finding is that these lines are blurring in terms of where responsibilities for certain things lie. When we think about the transportation aspect at Elk Grove Unified, moving a lot of kids around on any given day, well, they're moving on the roadways that Scott's organization is responsible for keeping safe. And so how do we put our heads together to improve, and so not just transform for the sake of transformation, but going back to the video and really understanding the mission and how that mission continues to evolve, because now it's not just the mission within our own walls, but that it's a bigger mission, right? So with that, I want to, when we think about transformational changes, let's talk a little bit about how that's affecting the way decisions are being made within your organizations. And we can talk, I'll open it up a little bit, because we can talk about policy changes, business processes. Do you want to pick one? Do you want me to cite one in particular that I'll have you drill down into?
I'll take business process for 10.
There you go.
And I think it's probably something that everybody can relate to. And I think anytime you talk transformation, you got to look at the business process, because I'm sure everybody's going to nod their head when I say this, but what is the default approach to new systems? Make it just like the old system. And it's one of those crazy things that when you process things, for example, on paper, you got to have a bunch of people touch it to do different things. And a lot of times electronically, it automates the system. And I won't mention the project, but we had a project in the past where you had an individual that had a role in the paper process system. Well, they were invited to the table as we discussed the new business process, and of course they carved out a role for them in the electronic system, but their original role was data entry. So why did we need the data entry person in the middle of an electronic system when the employee actually did the data entry now? We probably didn't get that one right. But I think it's a great example that when we look at change, there's a lot of folks that are resistant to change. And it's hard for them, but when you look at the mission and look at the goal, that efficiency that you get is tremendous for the organization. But I think people are threatened by it to do it. And so it's one of those things that you need to be careful that you don't duplicate your old process, but really rethink what we're trying to accomplish and how we need to accomplish it so that we can be very successful in that new process. And I think with that, it ties into, I'm going to take policy for 20 now, with that. I think it also ties into the importance of really looking at your policy also. And I'll go back to the body camera example, because it's one of those things that we could have done a rubber stamp and say, hey, we have an in-car policy, just use the same policy and you're good to go. And if we'd done that, we would have opened ourselves up to huge problems. And it was one of those things where we really had to sit down, roll up our sleeves, and dive into it. And I'll tell you, and I mentioned earlier that we had our union associated with it. And it was really, really important to the union, because you think about it, okay, you have an officer that puts on a body camera and wears it all day. there's probably times where you need to make sure that body camera is not on. And do you think their buy-in is very important in that process? Absolutely. We actually spent a year as a work group coming up with that policy as we were going through the approval process and working through getting the budget and everything else taken care of. But as a result, when we rolled out that policy, we had full acceptance. We had no pushback whatsoever from our folks that were going to be using the body cameras every single day. And it also gave us a chance to collaborate with other folks who've done it and learn lessons from them, so that we knew what questions to ask because we were brand new at it. And I think sometimes slowing down is really, really important when you look at that business process and that policy process to ensure that we get it right, so that you can then go back to making sure you're accomplishing what your goal is and improve the mission, as opposed to if you don't get it right, what happens? You end up with huge disruption, and that project that you were trying to roll out gets stopped, and then you're using resources trying to play catch up, when in fact, if you do a little more work on the front end, it works a little smoother.
Yeah, now it is, and especially when you touch on policy, Scott, I think that, and I know this is not news to anybody in this room, but it does illustrate why, when we think about transformation in the public sector, that it is maybe a bit more daunting, or certainly a bit different in terms of how we go about it than in the private sector. If you were listening to the news as you were driving in here this morning, and Money Talk or whatever you were listening to, you heard Target down 13%. And if you're sitting at Target headquarters today and they think about transformation, and especially as this is on the heels of Sears looking at closing stores, at Macy's closing stores, at JCPenney closing stores, and this is all because transformation is happening faster than what they can keep up with. But one thing that they don't, policy probably isn't core to the discussion that they're having, right? And so you all are having to face similar challenges and opportunities, but on top of that, there are things such as policy, such as cross-organizational communications, right? How does law enforcement and education work better together? Steve, I'll pass the ball to you. What door do you want to look behind?
It's probably a little bit of both. I think it starts off more with the process, right? Is that I was talking about earlier was the inward and outward mindsets, and what's really happened is it's really helped break down those silos, and it's on the biggest thing that's changed in our process is getting people to the table and talking. My team, for one, being involved in decisions now that we were not involved with before. As IT, right, everything starts to hit our side of things. We're here to support that, but what would happen would be somebody would go out and just buy something, and then they would show up and say, hey, implement this. And we had no idea it was coming. We couldn't be involved with that decision. And then as that was being implemented, another department would come over and say, wait, I'd like to do something similar, but not that. I want something else. So we had multiple systems that were basically doing the same thing, but a little bit different because it was done with different pots of money and at different times, right? Because we have the way our money structures it, we had to do it maybe that way. And so what's happened now is we started to bring everybody to the table, and that's really helped open up some doors and mindsets into what's going on. And I'll use that, I think we'll come back to the transportation, is we started to talk about video surveillance of the district. And it was surprising, actually, as a district our size, we don't really have much. And so we started to talk about that. We passed a large bond. And part of what people was driven was, they wanted video surveillance at schools. Okay, we can start to put video surveillance in there, but then we started to say, okay, we can put cameras up there, but how does our safety and security department want that? We have basically our police services. So we started to talk about what are their needs? What are the facilities needs? How would that work? Well, let's bring IT in, right? Well, it's going to be on our network. How are we going to store all this? What are we going to do with the video? How is it going to be managed? Then we started talking, wait a second, our transportation department has GPS. It has cameras on there. Do we want it to be talking? Do we want to be able to track a student from the time they check onto a bus to the time they show up to school and have them go around campus and do those things? Started to create questions about our policies. Do we want policy that talks about tracking students from that level? Some people say yes, some people say no. So the policies start to change because do I want my student tracked as a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old or a 17-year-old? But getting everybody to talk and have those discussions about the processes of how we're going to choose products, how are we going to choose solutions, what are our big things, what don't we need, can we start to combine things together instead of having these silos of solutions that we have to try to implement and maintain. And it's really helped eliminate some, or at least start to have that conversation of eliminating some. So when we do that next one is, we might not be putting our lights on the network right now, but we know that's a possibility coming forward, so we can start to plan for those things. So we make sure that we're having those things for right now, but also for the future, so we can future-proof it, make sure our network can support things, make sure that we have all the things we need in place to support these different products, and then we can start to talk about feature sets, and we can start talking about needs from all the different departments. So our police services, if they say, I want to be able to go into a classroom and see what's going on instantly from my phone if something's going on, we want to make sure that something's there for that. But then we also have our bargaining units that are saying, I don't want a camera in there at all times, right? That I don't want you to be able to look into what I'm doing. So that's our policy component of that. So lots of different things kind of going on, but getting everybody to the table and not just viewing people as obstacles has been the biggest change for us in that area.
Excellent. A time check. We've got about 9 minutes left, and so I think I'll pose one more question for the two of you, and then open it up for a couple of questions from the audience. In this, we're talking about leadership here. Where do you, in that context, where do you focus transformational efforts right now?
I'll let you go ahead this time.
I think when I think about focus, I think I want to just take you back to the video from the standpoint of it's really got to be the mission. And I think it's interesting. I'll tell a story of what I do in my office, because as CIO, I get a bunch of vendors coming in, and everybody's got something they want to sell me. And everybody know what bot.stot is? Got a few people, a few folks are looking at me like, what in the world is a bot.stot? Okay, you think on the freeway, I guess they're raised paved marking devices, little reflectors on the freeway between lines. I keep one of those on my desk, and you're probably thinking, why in the world would you keep one of those on your desk? I use that as a reminder for both my staff and vendors of why I do what I do. And I always point to it and ask them, hey, you know what that is? And of course, I let them touch it and play with it and everything else. And I go, I keep that on my desk to remind me of why I'm here. And I'm here to make the job of my officers a whole lot easier. And if what I'm doing does not increase their efficiency and their effectiveness, I'm not doing it. And it really boils down to, when we're done with transformation, when we're done with change, when we're done with technology, have I given my officers more time to find that little old lady on a dark, deserted highway, get there, get her a tow truck, and wait with her until that tow truck arrives and get her home safely? Am I giving my officers more time to find another drunk driver to pull them off the road before they hurt your family or my family? And am I giving my officers more time, and boy, do they need more time, to find those texters that are more interested in a text message about what they're going to eat tonight than they are driving a car before they injure or kill your family? By the way, did I mention don't text and drive? Always got to get a traffic safety message in. But it really boils back to that mission and how we can focus our efforts on making sure that we as an organization with limited resources, and I know everybody's got limited resources, can do more with what we have. And if I'm able to look back and point at that, and it's funny, I'm probably the only CIO, well, maybe I'm not the only CIO, but I joke with the fact of, I want to be the chief in the highway patrol that no one knows. Because what that really means is I'm doing a really good job with getting technology out. That folks have the technology they need, the technology they have is working, and they don't need to worry about who they call to get it fixed or who to call to say, hey, I need something different. But it works and helps them so that, as in the video, the technology is transparent and the focus is on the mission.
Right. Well, I think that's a great statement about leadership in general, right? I think whether you're the chief information officer or the director of human resources, wouldn't it be great if you're managing that environment in such a way that you're the chief that people least know about, because things are working the way they're supposed to work?
And luckily, I think I'm the director that people know the least in my district.
Yeah, Steve
necessarily
always
a bad
contends,
thing,
hey,
yeah.
I wish they knew more about me. Come on, give me the money.
And it's going to be funny, is the conversations we've had is that we are very similar. You know, the difference, I mean, does a lot more and gets to carry a gun, but the way the missions are is that when we talk about it and we show videos for our district and so on, it's never, I don't ever see just a picture of a computer. I don't ever see a picture of just our HR system. We see pictures of kids and learning. And what we try to do is everything is, we follow our strategic goal. I mean, it's called E4, and I wrote it down because I always mess this one up, but it's every student in every classroom in every subject every day. It's not about the tech. It's not about what the tool, it's not about the gadget that's there. It's about our students and what they're doing, and we always drive home what that means, and that's what it's all about. And it's driving back to the mission, why we do things, and so yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought on that one, but
Yeah.
that I had it was perfect in my head before I went, so so
came
we'll end
across
it right
great.
there with that great part.
Yeah. Well, hey, that leaves us a few minutes here so we'd love to open it up for a question or three. So if somebody wants to step up and ask a question, now would be the time to do so. Please. And there's a mic out in the middle, if you could, please. And then that way it's captured for you, or for the video.
Which means I have time for another traffic safety tip.
Yeah.
Because we're out of the drought, we probably need to continue to remind folks, when it rains, slow down so we can get to where we're going. It's a hard concept to people to learn, especially after we've had so little rain. Please.
Yes, Steve
Scott, yes.
Anytime you get ready to make a change, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to weigh in on that change, how do you move forward with your goal and objective, keep your timeline, et cetera, but yet make them feel valued that they have input into the process?
That's a good question, and actually it's interesting because right now we are in a change of our student information system. As I said earlier, this is one of the largest systems we use in our district, and it's been a homegrown system. We built it from the ground up, and we had it for over 12 years, and we are
Sound
changing.
familiar? Yeah.
Yeah, and we're changing that right now. And the process that we went through was we talked about the problem first. What's the issue we're trying to resolve? And so what we did is we brought in a large group. We brought in our district, we brought in 75 to 100 people to have that conversation about what our problem was. And the way I started with that was discussion from leadership, from the top. Okay, here are the things that are going on, and it got them to have the buy-in to understand what our problem was. And so then it's much easier to get people there when people from the top start to understand that issue and believe that that's an important thing. And so we brought people in and had them we had them help make the decision on what system to go with. So we brought in all those people to help with that decision, and they all had an equal vote. I didn't vote at all. Is that we brought all these people in to view those things, and they made the vote. And I'd like to say we timed this out perfectly, or I coordinated all this, but we brought 3 different people in. We did all those different things with this, and 100% of the people chose a product. So we got lucky, I think, right, that we had 100%. There wasn't one deviation from that. But as we've started to try to roll this system out now, there has not been people complaining about things because they all have had that original buy-in and that upfront part about the problem, and then helping make that choice in the solution by presenting ones that we knew would work really helped.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, great question. And I think we have time for one more. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Please.
Hello, thank you. I have a question from an educational perspective and IT. I'm actually working on my doctorate in educational leadership. And so we have a lot of questions that come up in the classroom in regards to the different ways that student learns. So I think this question is maybe for Scott. So from a policy perspective, you know, in order to save cost and ease congestion on the road in Elk Grove, has Elk Grove looked at online learning from K to 12? And if so, what would that look like from an IT perspective? And would there be any privacy concerns with data coming from the school being transported back to the person's home and vice versa?
Yeah, that's a big one right there. The online learning, absolutely. We are actually starting to we dabble in it, and part of the issue that one thing I've learned is I learn a lot from others' failures and so on. And so what we've started to do is we've started to look at some issues that we're running into on adoptions and curriculum. And I don't know if you know or not, but in the elementary side of things, when we purchase curriculum, they need to be state approved. There's lots of and tons of online resources that are available for us, and they're great resources for the individual teacher. But when we look at an organizational structures, I can't necessarily say, here's a free resource, great, go use it, because it will change tomorrow, and it might not be state approved for that. So we look to work with some of our vendors on our curriculum providers on that. So we look at the online materials, and for the online learning, we're working towards doing that. There is a lot of policy concerns on, well, one, device-wise. We've got Williams Act to make sure that we've got connections at home. We've got devices at home to make sure that because we have to send books home to make sure things are there, so we have to do the same thing for devices and access. Student privacy, that is a huge concern for us right now and a big thing that's going on. We had some laws change in the last couple of years called AB 1584 where student data privacy, we're making sure are intact. So if we send information outside to a online learning provider or learning management system, then yeah, for sure we have to make sure that student data privacy. If we have it on our stuff, it's a little bit less concerning because we know we control it, we take care of that, we don't have to worry about an outside provider. So we're working towards that. It's a long-term thing, and it's funny, we start to talk about small groups of people saying that we need more devices, more access. We ask larger, broader people, 80 to 90% are very happy with the amount of access we have. So it's a community involvement too question we have to start to ask on if we're going to go all online.
Well, and I think that wraps up the amount of time we have. It's an interesting way to finish the discussion because when we think about, we talked about some of the transformative things that are happening within these organizations today, but as we look forward into the future, online learning, autonomous driving, all of these things that will have direct impact on these organizations, and I'm sure yours as well. This discussion, hopefully there was some takeaways of what you can take back to your organization, and one of our key goals was not that we would come to this discussion with all of the answers. That's just not the case. But hopefully the conversation stimulated some questions, some better questions that you might ask yourselves as you go back into your own respective day jobs and look at how you might also find great leadership opportunities as transformation flows down the pipe. So with that, we really appreciate you taking the time and joining us this morning. Thanks again to both Scott and Steve. One more last round of applause for both of them. Thank you.